Om Shri Rama Rama Rameti Rame Rame Manorame Sahasranama Tattulyam Rama Nama Varanane Om Apadamapahartaram Dataram Sarvasampadam Lokabhiramam Shriramam Bhuyo Bhuyo Namamyaham. Namaskar. Thank you for joining us on this journey of reading the Valmiki Ramayana. The objective of this project is to bring to the attention of today's youth, scientists, academics, and the interested general public the original Valmiki Ramayana written by the great Rishi around 12,209 and 12,000 BCE. We have just completed the second book of the Valmiki Ramayana, the AyodhyaKandam, the book of Ayodhya. Every day we bring to you one chapter or sarga or canto of the Valmiki Ramayana, which has been organized in playlists for each of the books as we read them. In the description below, for your convenience, you will find links to each of the chapters of the Ayodhyakandam. We are using the Sanskrit text with the English and Hindi translations published by Gita Gorakhpur Press. We encourage you to buy a copy of the Valmiki Ramayana by the Gita Gorakhpur Press with translations in the language of your choice to read along with us. I also invite you to check out the synopsis of the Balakandam Book 1 of the Valmiki Ramayana. If you have not already listened to the Balakandam, you will find the link in the description below for each of the chapters. Through this synopsis, you will find Ayodhyakandam's potential for revealing details about an ancient and prosperous civilization. It encourages further exploration and research based on the rich descriptions found within these chapters of the Ramayana. I also encourage you to watch the video on the Ramayana project and the relevance of the Valmiki Ramayana, where you will find details on potential research topics, and we give you the link in the description below. Like many of you, for me too, this is a first time reading of this great Mahavya Adi Kavya of 26,000 verses. It is Itihasaha, a record of that is how it happened, as said by the Rishi himself. This ancient epic poem, this Adi Kavya, is filled with valuable insights for everyone, not just the elderly, but for all age groups. We have completed reading the first two books of the Valmiki Ramayana, the Balakandam and the Ayodhyakandam, and we find details of a highly advanced, developed, and prosperous kingdom with a strong economy and a happy people. This synopsis offers a glimpse into the life of the Ikshvaku clan and the rich world of the Koshala kingdom depicted in the Ayodhyakandam, inviting us into further exploration and research of the life of those times. Chapter 1 of the Ayodhyakandam. Bharata, having left for his maternal grandfather's capital along with Shatrughna, Emperor Dasharatha makes up his mind to install Sri Rama as his regent and summoning a number of princes for consultation, confers with them on the subject. Chapter 2. Dasharatha apprises the assembly of his intention to retire from active rule after relegating the power to Sri Rama's able hands, and the councillors with one voice ditto the proposal and urge the emperor to expedite the matters. Chapter 3. Urged by the emperor to solemnize the installation of Sri Rama as Prince Regent, Vashishta enjoins in his turn Dasharatha, minister Sumantra, and others to get ready all requisites for the ceremony. Sent by Sumantra, Sri Rama in the meantime calls on his father, who announces his decision to install him as Prince Regent and also tenders some opportune advice to him. Sri Rama's chums break the news to Sri Rama's mother Kaushalya. Treasuring in his mind the extortion of his father and bowing low to him, Sri Rama returns to his apartments. Chapter 4. Apprehending obstruction of Sri Rama's installation from an ominous dream, Dasharatha summons Sri Rama immediately, asks him to observe certain sacred vows preliminary to installation along with Sita. Bidding him go by his father, Sri Rama enters his mother's gynecium and, after receiving her blessing, retires along with Sita, who is already present there at his own palace. Chapter 5. At the instance of the emperor, Vashishta calls at Sri Rama's palace and instructs him, along with Sita, to fast for the night. Returns to Dasharatha. Permitted by the sage, the emperor adjourns the assembly and retires to the gynecium. Chapter 6. Enjoined by sage Vashishta, Sri Rama undertakes a vow to bathe early in the morning, worship the gods, and sleep for the night on a mat of kusha grass. On waking up the next morning, he says his Sandhya prayers and Brahmanas wish him propitious day. The citizens decorate the city to give it a festive appearance, and it is thronged with men eager to witness the installation of Sri Rama as Prince Regent. Chapter 7. Beholding the festivities and finding Kausalya bestowing large gifts of money on the Brahmanas, Manthara, a hunchback, hereditary maidservant of Queen Kaikeyi, who has accidentally ascended the roof of the palace, inquires of Sri Rama's erstwhile nurse the occasion for the festivities, and being told of Sri Rama's forthcoming installation, feels enraged and, approaching Kaikeyi, instigates her to stop the installation. Kaikeyi, on the other hand, rejoices over the news and gives her a jewel as a token of her pleasures. Chapter 8. While Manthara was thus trying to impress on Kaikeyi's mind that the installation of Sri Rama on the throne of Ayodhya would spell disaster to Bharata, Kaikeyi, for her part, went on harping on Sri Rama's virtues, maintaining that his installation as Prince Regent was quite welcome to her. Manthara, however, goes on laboring her point and urges Kaikeyi to interrupt the installation. Chapter 9. Kaikeyi, whose heart was poisoned by the malicious gossip of Manthara, as aforesaid, takes a vow to see that Rama is sent into exile and Bharata installed as Prince Regent, and asks Manthara herself how to secure that consummation. Manthara tells her how, in the course of the conflict with the gods and the demons, in which Dasharatha's help was enlisted by the gods, the queen, who had accompanied her husband to the field of operations and had rendered valuable assistance to him at a critical juncture, was offered a couple of boons, which she had kept in abeyance. Manthara now asks her to demand the banishment of Rama and the installation of Bharata against the two promised boons. Kaikeyi accordingly throws away her ornaments and lies down on the bare floor in the sulking room in a sullen mood. Chapter 10. Having told off Sumantra and others to get together necessities for the installation of Sri Rama, Dasaratha calls on Kaikeyi to break the happy news to her. Not finding her in her apartments, however, he makes inquiries from the portress, who tells him of her presence in the sulking chamber. The emperor calls on her there and, lifting her up, cajoles her. Chapter 11. Egged on by Kaikeyi to grant her desire, Dasharatha gives his word of honor to her to that effect. Invoking the presence of the gods as a witness and reminding the emperor of what took place during the conflict of the gods and the demons, Kaikeyi asks of him the two boons promised by him in the shape of exiling Sri Rama for a period of 14 years and installing Bharata as Prince Regent. Chapter 12. Extolling the virtues of Sri Rama and showing him undeserving of exile, the emperor endeavors to dissuade Kaikeyi from the pertinacity in sending Sri Rama into exile. Quoting the examples of Harishchandra and others, Kaikeyi, however, redoubles her insistence. The emperor, for his part, rebukes her in harsh words and goes the length of falling at her feet in order to bring her around, but in vain. Chapter 13. Further tormented by Kaikeyi through her importunity to have the boons granted by the emperor implemented, the latter piteously wails his lot and reproaches her. The sun has set in the meanwhile, and the emperor continues till the following morning. His solicitations to Kaikeyi to allow Rama to be installed as Prince Regent. But Kaikeyi remains adamant. The king, in his extreme anguish of mind, sinks down unconscious on the floor, and on regaining his consciousness, stops all music on the occasion of the king quitting his bed. Chapter 14. Citing other instances of the emperor's fidelity to truth and threatening to lay down her life in the event of his not carrying out her wishes, Kaikeyi insists on his sending Sri Rama into exile at once and does not desist from her purpose even when rallied at by her husband. In the meantime, Sumantra, making his appearance in the gynecium and extolling the emperor, reminds him of his intention to install Sri Rama as Prince Regent and eventually leaves the gynecium to summon Sri Rama at the instance of the emperor. Chapter 15. While going out of the gynecium to bring Sri Rama, Sumantra sees Vashishta and others, as well as many kings, waiting at the gate and hastens back to announce their presence to the king. He is, however, sent back to fetch Sri Rama and forthwith enters the latter's apartments. Chapter 16. Seeking the presence of Sri Rama, Sumantra communicates to him the emperor's command, asking Sumantra to bring Rama to him, and departs. Mounting his gold chariot and accompanied by Lakshmana, who holds an umbrella over Sri Rama's head and waves a pair of cowries to fan him, and followed by several elephants and horses, Sri Rama drives in state to see Dasharatha, listening en route to his own glory sung by jubilant men and women. Chapter 17. Sri Rama drives in state to his father's gynecium, beholding en route the charms of Ayodhya, hearing the blessing and the encomia of his friends and relations, and ravishing the eyes of all onlookers, and on reaching his destination, sends back his retinue and seeks the presence of his royal father alone. Chapter 18. Questioned by Sri Rama as what preyed on his mind, Kaikeyi tells him all that has happened in the meantime and sternly urges him to depart for the woods. Chapter 19. Having agreed to leave for the forest, Sri Rama proceeds to take leave of his mother, Kausalya. Chapter 20. Even as Sri Rama issued forth from the palace of Kaikeyi, the inmates of the gynecium burst into a piteous wail, exhorting the prince's virtues. Mother Kausalya embraces and pronounces her benedictions on Sri Rama as the latter approaches her and falls at her feet. Being appraised of the circumstances that had brought him there, she falls to the ground, overwhelmed with grief, and weeps bitterly, expressing her deep sorrow. Chapter 21. Consoling Kausalya in her grief over the impending exile of Sri Rama, Prince Lakshmana opposes the idea of Sri Rama leaving for the forest and censuring Dasharatha, makes up his mind to accompany his elder brother. Kausalya too deters Sri Rama from going into exile, branding Kaikeyi's command as unjust. Sri Rama, however, justifies the command on the ground of its being countenanced by the emperor and requests his mother to grant him leave and perform auspicious rites connected with his departure. Chapter 22. Sri Rama pacifies Lakshmana, who is very angry with Kaikeyi, but by denying the instrumentality of Kaikeyi in his banishment and laying the entire blame on his own fate. Chapter 23. Enraged to hear the extortions of Sri Rama, Lakshmana urges in reply that the word of their father was worth ignoring inasmuch as it was divorced from righteousness. Further emphasizing the predominance of personal effort over destiny, persuades Sri Rama to take up arms against those who interfere with his installation and occupy the throne of Ayodhya by force. Sri Rama, however, pacifies Lakshmana and impresses upon him the imperative necessity of their carrying out the command of their father. Chapter 24. Finding Sri Rama firm in his obedience to the command of his parents, Kausalya urges him to take her along with him. On being told, however, it was incumbent on a matron whose husband was alive to remain with the latter and serve him, she consents to Sri Rama's departure to the forest. 25. Having received the mother's benediction for the journey, Sri Rama falls at her feet and proceeds to the apartments of Sita in order to see her. Chapter 26. Beholding Sri Rama depressed in spirits and lustreless, with frustration writ large on his countenance, Sita, who knew nothing about the interruption of his installation and had been eagerly and joyfully waiting for his return, inquires about the cause of his dejection and is told how his installation has been stopped and how he is going to be sent into exile by his father, and exhorted to look after her father-in-law and mother-in-law as before, and to treat Bharata and Shatrughna as her own brothers or sons, and never to harbor malice towards them. Chapter 27. Exhorted by Sri Rama to stay in Ayodhya to look after his parents, Sita submits in reply that she, being his counterpart, her exile is implied in his, and insists on her being taken with him, since she would not be able to bear separation from him. Chapter 28. Bringing home to Sita the austerity and hardships of forest life, Sri Rama tries once more to dissuade her from her insistence on accompanying him to the forest. Chapter 29. Sita continues to implore Sri Rama to take her to the forest along with him. Sri Rama, however, is adamant and goes on cajoling her and asking her to stay on in Ayodhya. Though consoled by Sri Rama in many ways, Sita did not change her mind, and seeing she was insistent on accompanying him, Sri Rama agrees to take her to the forest and asks her to prepare for the journey and to give away all her personal belongings to charity. Hearing the dialogue of Sri Rama and Sita, Lakshmana seeks his permission to accompany him to the forest. Sri Rama desires him to stay in Ayodhya to look after his mothers. But seeing his insistence, he agrees to take him as well, then urges him to bring Suyanjana and other rishis, accounting them worthy of receiving gifts from him. Chapter 32. Having received gifts of jewels and ornaments from Sri Rama and Sita, Suyanjana invokes divine blessings on the couple. Enjoined by Sri Rama, Lakshmana then bestows silk, costumes, and ornaments, etc., on the sons of sage Agastya and others. Urged by his wife, sage Trijata by name approaches Sri Rama and seeks riches from him. Thereupon Sri Rama bestows on him thousands of cows and distributes his remaining wealth among other brahmanas as well as among his relations and dependents. Chapter 33. Having distributed his immense riches among the brahmanas and others, Sri Rama, accompanied by Sita and Lakshmana, proceeds to his father's gynecium to take leave of him. Remaining unruffled even on hearing en route the diverse stocks of citizens gathered here and there, with melancholy writ large on their faces, the royal trio reaches their destination and urges Sumantra to appraise their royal father of their arrival. Chapter 34. Appraised of Sri Rama's arrival by Sumantra, Dasharatha commands him to usher in Sri Rama with his consort, seeing the emperor fall unconscious at the very sight of the heir apparent. The ladies of the royal household start wailing piteously. On Sri Rama soliciting his permission to retire to the woods, the king enjoins him to take his father captive and ascend the throne. Sri Rama, in his turn, consoles his father by assuring him that he has no hankering for royal fortune and that to him obedience to his father's command is of utmost importance. Dasharatha, however, falls unconscious again at the very thought of his separation from Sri Rama, and Sumantra, as well as all the ladies of the gynecium, follow suit. Chapter 35. Hoping that by being provoked to anger, Kaikeyi might come around and relax her insistence on sending Sri Rama into exile, Sumantra harshly reproaches her, reminding her of her mother's misbehavior towards her husband, that is Kaikeyi's father. Kaikeyi, however, remains adamant and does not budge even an inch from her purpose. Chapter 36. Dasharatha instructs Sumantra to take a detachment of the army and the exchequer along with Sri Rama, to which Kaikeyi objects and insists on his being sent into exile without any resources, On the analogy of Asamanja, son of the king's forefather Sagara. Another minister of the king, Siddhartha by name, who was present there, opposes Kaikeyi and urges that the analogy of Asamanja, who was a perverse lad, could not be applied in the case of Sri Rama, who possessed an ideal character and deserved in every way to be installed in the office of Prince Regent. In the event of Kaikeyi vetoing the proposal, the king threatens to accompany the heir apparent. Chapter 37. Sri Rama urges his servants to fetch the bark of trees to be used as his wearing apparel. At this, Kaikeyi herself brings the desired dress, which both Sri Rama and Lakshmana, taking off their princely robes, cover themselves in. Sita, however, finds it difficult to wear the bark supplied to her and ultimately puts it on over her own dress with the help of Sri Rama. Despite the remonstrances of Vashishta, who severely castigates Kaikeyi for her cruelty in exiling them. Chapter 38. Incensed to hear the loud wailing of those present at the scene on Sita being dressed as a hermitess, Dashratha reproaches Kaikeyi. While departing, Sri Rama entreats his father to take care of his mother. Chapter 39. Sent away by Dasharatha, Sumantra gets a chariot ready to take Sri Rama and his party to the forest, and Sita adorns herself with jewels brought by the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Kausalya tenders opportune advice to her daughter-in-law, and the latter bows to it. Sri Rama comforts Kausalya and offers apology to his other mothers, who burst into tears. Chapter 40. Going clockwise around Dasharatha as a token of respect, Sita, Rama, and Lakshmana greet him. Accompanied by Sita, Sri Rama salutes Kausalya. Lakshmana too hails Kausalya first, then his own mother, Sumitra. Sumitra, for her part, tenders salutary advice to her son. The princess and the princesses having mounted the chariot, Sumantra flicks the horses. The citizens that had assembled closely follow the chariot, unable to keep pace with the swift movement, they return desolate. Dasharatha too runs after the chariot along with Kausalya and others, but being unable to walk, begins to totter and stops short on the road, yielding to the remonstrances of his wise ministers. Chapter 41. The ladies of the royal gymnasium bewail the exile of Sri Rama and others, and the citizens of Ayodhya too are reduced to a miserable plight. Chapter 42. Sri Rama, having departed for the forest in an exceptionally swift chariot, Dasharatha vainly seeks to cover the intervening distance on foot. The very dust raised by the chariot having disappeared after a while, the emperor feels doubly disconsolate and drops to the ground. When Kaikeyi comes forward to support him, he scolds her and asks her not to touch his person. Kausalya then lifts him up and persuades him to return. His personal attendants take him to the latter's apartment. And seeing him plunged in grief, Kausalya sets herself beside him and begins to lament in various ways. 43. The Lament of Kausalya. 44. Establishing the greatness of Sri Rama, Sumitra, who is a past master in eloquence, assuages Kausalya's grief. Chapter 45. When the citizens that followed Sri Rama in his journey to the forest refused to return, even when pleaded by Sri Rama in many ways, unable as they were to bear separation from him, Sri Rama with Sita and Lakshmana gets down from his chariot and begins to walk. The citizens try to deflect him from his course and persuade him to return, but in vain. At the close of the day, they all reach the bank of the Tamasa river. Chapter 46. Having reached the banks of the Tamasa and thinking of the plight of the people of Ayodhya, Sri Rama lays himself down on a bed of leaves, bewailing the lot of his parents and feeling reassured by the thought of Bharata's noble qualities. While Lakshmana opens his dialogue with Sumantra on the divine excellence of Sri Rama. Waking up in the meantime, Sri Rama urges the chariot minister to drive the chariot in such a way as to put the citizens that had accompanied them off the scent and lead them to think that the chariot had turned back towards Ayodhya. instead of proceeding towards the forest. He then mounts the chariot along with Sita and Lakshmana and presses on into the forest. Chapter 47. The citizens that had followed Sri Rama in his journey to the forest woke to find Sri Rama and his party are gone and begin to reproach themselves. Overcome with grief, they hunt up the tracks of his chariot, but unable to find them, they helplessly return to Ayodhya in utter despondency. Chapter 48. Told of Sri Rama's departure for the forest by the citizens who had gone out with Sri Rama and returned unable as they were to find out the tracks of his chariot, their wives reproach Kaikeyi and break into lamentation. Chapter 49. Having covered a long distance in the meantime, Sri Rama finishes the morning bath and devotions, and having crossed the Vedashruti, the Gomati, and Syandika rivers, presses forward, talking to Sumantra. Chapter 50. Standing with his face towards Ayodhya, Sri Rama bids farewell to his birthplace and sent back the people hailing from the countryside who had come to see him, and crossing the frontiers of Koshala, Sri Rama reaches the bank of the holy Ganga. Alighting from the chariot under an ingudi tree, standing on the bank, he goes forward to meet Guha, the chief of the Nishads, who had come to meet him. Nay, worshipping the evening twilight and taking water only for food and drink, the prince lies down on the ground to repose for the night, while Sumantra, Guha, and Lakshmana spend the night talking together. Chapter 51. Expressing his readiness to guard the crown prince and his consort, keeping awake the whole night, Guha importunes Lakshmana to repose. Reminding Guha of Sri Rama's greatness, Lakshmana, however, tells him that even though the duty of guarding his princely brother and his consort could as well be entrusted to Guha, he felt that he did not deserve to lie down in the presence of his elder brother and sister-in-law and preferred to remain away. Expressing grief for his royal father and loving mothers, he therefore spends the night talking with Guha. Chapter 52 is a long chapter with 102 verses and is divided into three parts. In part 1, we see while about to step into the boat brought by Guha's men and asked by Guha if he could be of any further use to the prince, Sri Rama enjoins him to obey the emperor. In part 2, opportuned by Sumantra to take him as a personal attendant to the forest, the prince declines his loving offer and, expostulating with him, sends him back to Ayodhya. Entangling their locks in a thick mass with the milk of the banyan tree procured by Guha. Part 3, Sri Rama, Lakshmana, and Sita get into the boat. On reaching the middle of the stream, Sita offers prayers to Mother Ganga, the deity presiding over the stream, and after crossing the river, all three halt for the night at the foot of a tree. Chapter 53. Apprehending trouble for Kausalya and others at the hands of Kaikeyi, Sri Rama, who was seated at the foot of a banyan tree and was a past master in the art of persuasion, persuades Lakshmana to the best of his ability to return to Ayodhya. Lakshmana, however, pleads inability to survive in his absence and does not budge an inch from his resolution to stay with his eldest brother. Sri Rama therefore yields and sets his seal to his continuing with him during his exile. Chapter 54. Setting out on his journey for the Dandaka forest with Sita and Lakshmana, Sri Rama reaches at dusk the hermitage of sage Bharatvaja in the vicinity of the confluence of the holy Ganga and Yamuna rivers. Paying due honors to Sri Rama and his party, the sage recommends Chitrakuta as the fittest place for him to sojourn in. Spending the night in discourses on various topics with the sage, grants him leave early next morning to depart for Chitrakuta. Chapter 55. Sage Bharatvaja tells Sri Rama and Lakshmana, even as they set out on their journey to Chitrakuta, the route by which they should proceed. Accompanied by Sita, Sri Rama and Lakshmana cross the Yamuna on a raft prepared by themselves. In the evening, they halt on the bank of the Yamuna along with Sita, who is rejoiced to get fruits and blossoms of her liking. Chapter 56. Moving further the next morning and rejoicing on the way to see the loveliness of the forest, the party reaches Chitrakuta and enters the hermitage of Valmiki. Making up his mind to sojourn there with the permission of the sage, Sri Rama gets Lakshmana to erect a hut of leaves for themselves, and worshipping the deities presiding over the structure, they solemnly enter their abode at a propitious hour. Chapter 57. Having been told of Sri Rama's departure to Chitrakuta by the spies of Guha and taking leave of the latter, Sumantra drives back to Ayodhya. Entering the royal gynecium, he submits to the emperor what he reported earlier to the citizens who followed his chariot. Dasharatha and Kausalya fall into a swoon to hear about Sri Rama's departure for Chitrakuta, and all the inmates of the gynecium burst into a wail of agony. Chapter 58. Bewailing the lot of Sri Rama, Sita, and Lakshmana, who did not in any way deserve the hardships they were undergoing in the forest, the emperor urges Sumantra to deliver their parting message, and the charioteer proceeds to tell him what they said. Chapter 59. To satisfy the emperor's curiosity, Sumantra tells him further of Sri Rama's departure for the forest, and also appraises him of the pitiable conditions of the animates as well as the inanimate creations in his realm, and also of his capital consequence on Sri Rama's exile. Hearing of the woeful tale, Dasharatha raves like a madman in many ways in the presence of the charioteer minister. Chapter 60. Sumantra does not succeed in soothing the agony of Kausalya, who tossed about on the floor due to excess of grief over her separation from Sri Rama. Even though he consoles her by telling her that Sri Rama, being resolute and high-minded, was living in the forest, free from agony. Chapter 61. Apprehending danger to the king from his inability to bear the grief caused by separation from Sri Rama, Kausalya, the foremost among devoted wives, twits Dasharatha. Chapter 62. When reproached in harsh words by Kausalya, though already feeling disconsolate through separation from his sons and daughter-in-law, Dasharatha falls into a swoon, recalling his past sin in the form of killing a hermit boy, which was responsible for his present misfortune. On waking from his swoon, he tries with folded hands to conciliate Kausalya, and on the latter reciprocating his sentiment, the emperor is lulled into a nap. Chapter 63. Waking from sleep after a while and recalling his sinful deed which spelled death to him, Dasharatha proceeds to tell Kausalya how, while he was a prince regent of Ayodhya, he went on a hunt in the forest one day and heard during the last watch of the night the sound of a hermit boy filling his pitcher with water by submerging it in the Sarayu river. Mistaking the gurgling sound for the trumpeting of an elephant, Dasharatha hits the boy with an arrow which digs deep into his body, mortally wounding him. On approaching his quarry, he discovers his fatal blunder and tenders his heartfelt apology to the hermit boy, who asks him to extract the arrow from his body and report the matter to his aged parents. The boy died immediately as the arrow was taken out of his body. Chapter 64. Dasharatha continues to tell Kausalya how, having sought the presence of the aged parents of the deceased, he appraises them of the sad incident and escorts them to the river bank, where their son lay dead. However, clasping the boy to their bosom, they both piteously wailed and offered libations of water to his spirit for its benefit. How, invested with an ethereal body, the spirit ascends to heaven while consoling the aged couple, and finally, how, having cursed the king, that he too would meet his death in his agony of separation from his son. The ascetic couple give up the body and merged with the Supreme. Having thus related the story of his imprecation and loudly lamenting, the emperor breathes his last with the thought of Sri Rama foremost in his mind. Chapter 65. When the emperor did not wake up, even though roused by means of panegyrics sung by the bards, accompanied by musical instruments played upon for the same purpose. The ladies of the Guyanese hymn conclude by other means that the king is dead, and soon after commences the loud wail of Kausalya, Sumitra, and the other queens. Chapter 66. Resting the head of the lifeless monarch in her own lap and severely reproaching Kaikeyi, Kausalya grievously mourns for Sri Rama and other exiles. Holding back Kausalya, who was lamenting with her arms placed round her deceased husband's bosom, and consigning the emperor's dead body to a trough filled with oil, the ministers and other functionaries return each to his own abode in the evening. Chapter 67. Attributing the rise and fall of a kingdom to the presence and disappearance of its ruler, Markandeya and other sages who attended the king's court the following day urged Vashishta to install any of the princes on the throne immediately. Chapter 68. With the concurrence of Markandeya and other sages, Vashishta dispatches messengers to call back Bharata and Shatrughna from their maternal grandfather. They leave forthwith for the capital of Kekeya and quickly enter that city. Chapter 69. Finding Bharata oppressed and sad, his friends try to beguile him by means of music and narration of stories. But when the prince does not return to his normal mood, even then they inquire of him as to what makes him pensive, and Bharata tells them how he saw a bad dream the previous night. Chapter 70. While Bharata was narrating to his friends the dream seen by him the previous night, the messengers from Ayodhya arrive in his presence and, bowing low to Bharata, communicate to him the orders of sage Vashishta. Having heard of the welfare of all from the mouth of the messengers, the prince takes leave of his maternal grandfather and others and departs for Ayodhya. Chapter 71. When Bharata reaches Ayodhya after crossing many streams and rivers and passing through different territories and finds the city cheerless and wearing a deserted look, he sets about brooding and speculating as to what may be the reason for this, and speaking to the charioteer about it, enters the palace, dejected and disconsolate. Chapter 72. Entering his father's apartments and not finding him there, Bharata moves to his mother's apartments, and having communicated to her the welfare of his maternal grandfather and others, on being questioned by her, inquires of her the whereabouts of his father. Kaikeyi then breaks to him the news of his father's death, attributing it to Sri Rama's exile and holding herself responsible for the latter, and after comforting him, calls upon him to get himself installed on the throne after finishing his father's obsequies. Chapter 73. Bitterly reproaching Kaikeyi in many ways and cutting her to the quick by his caustic remarks, Bharata takes a vow before her to bring back Sri Rama from the forest and install him on the throne of Ayodhya and wait upon him as an attendant to offend her. Chapter 74. Severely reproaching his mother once more and making up his mind not only to bring back Sri Rama from the forest, crown him king, but also to go into exile for 14 years in order to redeem his elder brother's vow, Bharata, who is filled with rage at the thought of the mischief wrought by his mother. Chapter 75. Swearing that what had already come to pass in the shape of exile of Sri Rama, Sita, and Lakshmana, and the resultant death of the king emperor was not to his liking, Bharata moves with Shatrughna to the apartments of his stepmother Kausalya, who speaks unkindly to him, taunting him with the remark that his mother Kaikeyi had rendered good offices to him by securing for him the kingdom of Kausala, sought after by him. Bharata, however, politely denies on a number of oaths all complicity in the mechanizations of his vile mother. Thereby, coming to know of his heart, the guileless Kausalya places Bharata on her lap and weeps bitterly. Chapter 76. Removing his father's dead body from the vessel full of oil and cremating it with the help of articles befitting an emperor, and offering libations of water to the spirit of the deceased on the banks of Saryu, as enjoined by Vashishta, Bharata returns to Ayodhya. Chapter 77. Having performed with the help of Shatrughna all the obsequial rites relating to his deceased father, on the 12th day after his death, Bharata gives to the Brahmanas abundant gold and jewels as part of the obsequies. Overwhelmed with grief on reaching the funeral pyre in order to pick up the principal bones of the deceased on the 13th day, the prince drops to the ground. Rolling on the ground, Shatrughna for his part wails in profusion. Comforted by Vashishta and Sumantra, the two brothers urge the ministers to expedite the work of picking up the bones. Chapter 78. While Bharata is contemplating to undertake a journey to meet Sri Rama, Shatrughna blames Lakshmana for failing to restrain his father and forcibly prevent Sri Rama from exile. In the meantime, Bharata catches sight of Manthara standing at the door, decked with ornaments, and points to her as the root of all mischief. Shatrughna thereupon pounces upon the maidservant standing in the midst of her companions, and seizing her by her locks, drags her onto the floor and reproaches Kaikeyi too. On the latter pleading for mercy on Manthara's behalf, Bharata intervenes and Shatrughna lets her go. Chapter 79. On the 14th day, the foremost of counselors entreat Bharata to accept the throne. Turning down this entreaty, Bharata, who is keen to bring Sri Rama back to Ayodhya, urges them to detail expert engineers to construct a road, bridges, and causeways, etc., to facilitate his journey to the place of Sri Rama's abode. Chapter 80. The engineers detailed by Bharata's ministers construct a broad passage from Ayodhya to the bank of the Ganga and renders it easy to tread by erecting pavilions and digging wells here and there on the roadside. Chapter 81. The king's bard, panegyrists, and minstrels, having commenced eulogizing Bharata in the customary way in the midst of festal music at sunrise the following morning, Bharata stops it, disclaiming sovereignty, and complains to Shatrughna of the ill turn done to the world by his own mother. In the meantime, sage Vasishta enters the royal court and sends messengers to Bharata, urging him to be present in court. And in response to his call, Bharata, accompanied by Shatrughna and others, enter the assembly. Chapter 82. Sage Vashishta urges Bharata to accept the kingdom bequeathed to him by his father and elder brother. Bharata, however, scornfully declines the offer and takes a solemn pledge to depart for the forest and try his level best to bring his brother back to Ayodhya. At his instance, Sumantra gets a chariot ready to take him to the forest and brings the chariot to his presence. Chapter 83. Leaving the capital early next morning, accompanied by the family priests, artisans, and citizens covering a long distance, Bharata reaches the bank of the holy Ganga at Sringaverpura. Ruled by Guha and encamping, the army breaks journey in the order to do Shraddh and Tarpana in honor of the deceased father on the banks of the Ganga, and also to give rest to his followers. Chapter 84. Scenting mischief in the mind of Bharata, who was taking a large army with him, Guha orders the ferrymen to guard the boats so as to prevent Bharata's men from crossing the Ganga, and himself seeks the presence of Bharata in order to know his mind. Being satisfied with his good intentions, he entertains Bharata and his men with fruits and roots, etc., brought by him, and on his having taken rest a while and overcome his fatigue, allows him to advance. Chapter 85. Highly praising Guha, Bharata, while departing, inquires of him the way to the hermitage of Bharatwaja. Promising to follow the prince as a guide with his servants and placing his misgivings before him, Guha seeks to his intentions about Sri Rama and consoles the prince, who was constantly bewailing till dusk. Chapter 86. Guha reports to Bharata how Sri Rama and his party broke their journey at Sringaverpura and reproduces before him the dialogue that took place between Lakshmana and himself at night, and further tells him how the two brothers entangled their locks into a thick mass, crossed the holy river with Sita, and left for the hermitage of Sri Bharatwaja. Chapter 87. Overwhelmed with grief to hear from Guha how his two brothers got their hair entangled into a mass, Bharata falls unconscious on the ground. On regaining consciousness, he dispatches Guha to reassure Mother Kausalya, who is filled with apprehension about the safety of Sri Rama and his party on hearing Bharata's swoon, and to appraise her of the real cause and also of Sri Rama's welfare. While doing so, Guha also tells her how Sri Rama and Sita lay down on a bed of kusha grass prepared by Lakshmana with his own hands when the party broke their journey at Shringaverpura, and how Guha and Lakshmana kept watch the whole night for the protection of Sri Rama and Sita. Chapter 88, showing Kausalya and others the bed of kusha grass on which Sri Rama spent the night and contrasting it with the royal splendor and luxury in which he lived in Ayodhya. Bharata laments for him and holding himself responsible for this turn of events and complimenting Lakshmana and Sita for throwing in their lot with Sri Rama and sharing his privations, makes up his mind henceforth to dwell in the forest as a representative of Sri Rama, wearing matted locks on his head like him. Having encamped his followers, including the army that were ferried across the Ganga by fishermen and joined by Guha, Bharata sets out with sage Vashishta and others to the hermitage of sage Bharatwaja with the intent to see the latter. Chapter 90. Leaving the party a couple of miles away on this side of the hermitage, Bharata enters it with Vashishta and Shatrughna. After exchanging of compliments between sage Vashishta and Bharata, Bharatwaja bows down at the feet of the latter, who inquires of his health and seeks to know his mind about Sri Rama. Bharata, therefore, thereupon remorsefully apprises him of his intention to bring Rama back from the forest and questions him about his whereabouts. To this, the sage replies that Sri Rama was sojourning on Mount Chitrakuta and advises Bharata to see the latter the following morning. Chapter 91. The hospitality is shown by sage Bharatwaja, who had acquired rare mystic powers by virtue of his austerities, to Bharata, his army and entourage, the kind of which could not be shown even by the ruler of the entire globe. Chapter 92. Questioned with folded hands about the road to Chitrakuta, Bharatwaja shows the way to Bharata and then inquires of him about the names of his three mothers, who stood bowing down to the sage. Having told him the names of all the three of his mothers with the history of each and commanding the army to get ready for the journey ahead, Bharata proceeds to Chitrakuta with his retinue. Chapter 93. Setting his foot on the soil of Chitrakuta with his army and camp followers and identifying the place with the help of the features pointed out by Bharatwaja, Bharata commands the army men to look out for the hermitage of Sri Rama. Pursuing their search, they perceive smoke at some distance and conclude the site to be the hermitage of Sri Rama. Bharata asks his army to halt and makes up his mind to walk with Vashishta and others to that place. Chapter 94. Diverting his mind and seeking to please Sita, Sri Rama gives a graphic description of Chitrakuta, stressing its special features. Chapter 95. In order to humor Sita, Sri Rama describes the river Mandakini in great detail to her. Chapter 96. While recreating himself in the company of Sita on the lovely hills of Chitrakuta, Sri Rama beholds all of a sudden a large cloud of dust screening the sun and hears a loud noise and dispatches Lakshmana to ascertain the cause. Lakshmana thereupon climbs up the top of a lofty tree and catching sight of an army with the chariot of its leaders distinguished by an ensign bearing the device of the Kovidara tree, hastily concludes that Bharata has come all this way to dispose of Sri Rama and thereby to make himself secure on the throne of Ayodhya. Returning apace to the presence of Sri Rama, he disburdens himself of his suspicions and speaks angrily about Bharata, swearing that he will kill the intruder. Chapter 97. Pointing out to Lakshmana, who was waxing indignant at Bharata, the impropriety of killing the latter, Sri Rama pacifies him by assuring him of the pious intentions of Bharata. Ashamed of himself to hear the opinion of his brother about Bharata, And climbing down the tree, Lakshmana hides his shame by changing the topic. Commanded by Bharata, who was anxious to avoid causing disturbance to the hermitage occupied by Sri Rama, the army encamps about Chitrakuta. Chapter 98. Telling off Guha and Shatrughna with their followers to find out the hermitage of Sri Rama, Bharata himself, who was keen to see Sri Rama, goes out in search of his hermitage with the ministers. Walking all the way and envying the good fortune of Sri Rama and Lakshmana, fortune of Sita and Lakshmana, who were living with Sri Rama, and reaching the foot of a sala tree and concluding the place from the presence of smoke nearby to be a human habitation, and ruling out the possibility of any other human being living in that lonely forest, he eagerly hastens forward in the hope of meeting Sri Rama. Chapter 99. Requesting Vashishta to fetch his mothers and pressing forward, Bharata reaches the hut made of leafy twigs in which the three exiles were living. While attempting to hail Sri Rama, Sita, and Lakshmana, who were living with Sri Rama, on seeing them, his eyes bedimmed with tears at the sight of their ascetic garb, he stumbles down even on uneven ground. Sri Rama hastens to lift him up and clasps him to his bosom. Sumantra and Guha as well meet Sri Rama and Lakshmana. Chapter 100. Placing Bharata on his lap, Sri Rama gives him instructions on judicature under the pretext of inquiring after the welfare of his father and others. Chapter 101. Questioned at what made him give up the sovereignty of Ayodhya and enter the forest in the garb of an ascetic, Bharata reproaches his mother and implores his elder brother to accept the kingship and return to Ayodhya. Sri Rama, however, pleads that the command of their father is supreme and must be implicitly obeyed by both of them. The first part of it enjoins the exile of the elder brother being binding on him, and the second part bequeathing the kingdom to Bharata being binding on the latter. Chapter 102. Bharata tells Sri Rama that having been deprived of the privilege of serving his elder brother, he will have nothing to do with sovereignty, and requests him to offer water to the spirit of his deceased father, who died with the thought of Sri Rama alone foremost in his mind. And the father implores Sri Rama to get himself consecrated for the sovereignty of Ayodhya, as the obsequies of their imperial father having been duly performed by the two brothers, Bharata and Shatrughna, at Ayodhya. Chapter 103. Fallen into a swoon to hear his father's ascent to heaven and brought back to consciousness by Bharata and others who sprinkle water on him and employ other such devices, Sri Rama laments in various ways. Comforted by Bharata and having in his turn consoled Sita and repairing to the bank of the Ganga, nay, offering water and bowls of cooked food to the spirit of his departed father, he returns to his hut. Hearing their cry of distress, the troops approach them and are greeted by Sri Rama according to their rank. Chapter 104. Accompanied by Kausalya and others, sage Vashishta proceeds to the hermitage of Sri Rama. Showing to her co-wives the lumps of pulp of the ingudi fruit offered to the spirit of his deceased father by Sri Rama on blades of kusha grass, placed with their ends pointing to the south along the banks of the Mandakini on the way. Kausalya grieves for her deceased husband. Reaching the hermitage, Kausalya and others see the two brothers, Sri Rama and Lakshmana, fall at their feet. Kausalya bewails the lot of Sita when the latter falls at her feet. Bowing down at the feet of his preceptor, Sri Rama takes a seat, accompanied by the counselors. Bharata too sits nearby. Chapter 105. Bharata implores Sri Rama to oblige him by accepting the throne of Ayodhya being offered by him to Sri Rama with the concurrence of Kaikeyi, even though bestowed on him by their deceased father. Consoling Bharata, who held himself responsible for Sri Rama's exile to the forest and was languishing with sorrow on that score, Sri Rama, however, tries to pacify him in various ways and urges him to shoulder the burden of rulership. Chapter 106. Imploring Sri Rama with cogent reasons to accept the throne of Ayodhya, Bharata takes a vow not to return to Ayodhya but to discontinue in the forest in case Sri Rama does not grant his prayer. When they find Sri Rama adamant in the matter and insistent on implementing the words of their deceased father, Mother Kausalya and others too join Bharata and urge Sri Rama to grant his request. Chapter 107. Sri Rama tries to imply upon Bharata, who believes that Dasharatha was prompted by lustful attachment to his mother in making over the kingdom to him, that Dasharatha was compelled to do so because in the first place he had promised Kaikeyi's father, while marrying her, that the latter's son alone would succeed to the throne after Dasharatha's death. And secondly, he was keen to repay the debt he owed to her for having come to his rescue in encounter with the demons, and accordingly urged Bharata to assume the rulership of Ayodhya. Chapter 108. Bharata, having been silenced by Sri Rama, an eminent sage Jabali by name, tries to persuade Sri Rama to accept the throne by advocating the theory of the Nastikas, the non-believers, with intent to arouse in him the lust for sovereignty. Chapter 109. Jabali explains the reasons for his advocating the theory of the Nastikas to Sri Rama, who exposed the hollowness of the ethics propounded by the sage, dubbing it as the very antithesis of Dharma. Chapter 110. Pacifying Sri Rama, who had got angry with Jabali, sage Vashishta urges him to get himself consecrated as king, since from the Ikshvakus, the progenitor of the race, downwards, the eldest son alone has ascended the throne of Ayodhya. And because he was not only the eldest of his father's sons, but also the ablest too. Chapter 111. Pleading the superiority of a teacher in comparison to one's parent, sage Vashishta, by virtue of his superiority, and as a concession to Bharata, a dependent of Sri Rama, urges Sri Rama, whose vow it has been to respect the feelings of his dependents, to grant the prayer of Bharata. Sri Rama, however, contends that one's parents are more worthy of respect even than one's teachers, and is accordingly insistent on implementing the pledge already given by him to his father. Thus discomforted in argument, Bharata makes up his mind to undertake a fast unto death, as a last resort to exert pressure on him. Sri Rama, dubbing such a step as repugnant to the code of conduct prescribed for a Kshatriya, Bharata requests his elder brother to allow him to remain in exile in the forest as the latter's proxy. Sri Rama, however, rules out that this proposition also as something preposterous, saying that one's duty is entrusted to a proxy only on a former's incapacity, which could not be predicated on him, and reaffirms his decision to enter Ayodhya only after fulfilling the pledge given to his father. Chapter 112. Collected in the heavens to hear the dialogue of Bharata and Sri Rama, heavenly beings applaud the two brothers. Having decided upon his course of action, Sri Rama turns his face towards his hut, while pleading his inability to protect his kingdom. Now that his attempts to take Sri Rama back to Ayodhya have been frustrated, Bharata prays to Rama for mercy once more. But finding that his elder brother cannot be swayed even an inch from his vows, he places a wooden sandal decked with gold in front of his brother and requests him to place his feet on them. Readily acceding to this request, Sri Rama hands over the sandals to Bharata, who takes a vow before him to enter the fire in case he does not return immediately on the expiry of his term of exile. Sri Rama confirms his vow, and after embracing Bharata and Shatrughna and bidding goodbye to all with due respect according to the rank of each, enters his cottage. Chapter 113. Departed back for Ayodhya along with sage Vashishta and others, Bharata pays his respect on the way to sage Bharatwaja and appraises him of what had happened at Chitrakuta and also of the pair of wooden sandals that he had received from Sri Rama as the latter's representative. Proceeding further, crosses the rivers Ganga and Yamuna along with his followers. Departing from Sringverpura, he catches sight of Ayodhya and points out to Sumantra its gloomy appearance. Chapter 114. Valmiki portrays the gloomy appearance of Ayodhya with the help of a number of similes. Bharata enters his father's palace with a heavy heart, speaking to Sumantra about the sorry spectacle that Ayodhya presented at that moment. Chapter 115. Permitted by Vashishta and accompanied by Shatrughna and others, when the queens had entered the gynaeceum, Bharata proceeds to Nandigram, and installing the wooden sandals of Sri Rama on the royal seat, he puts on the garb of an ascetic and carries on the rule under orders ascribed to the sandals, holding the royal umbrella over them. Chapter 116. Learning from outward signs that the ascetics who lived in the vicinity of Sri Rama were anxious to shift to some other forest, the latter asks them why they wish to leave the place. Being told in reply that they were being molested by the Rakshasas under the leadership of Khara, he gives his consent and, sending them away with great respect, retires to his own hermitage. Chapter 117. Afraid of prolonging his stay at Chitrakuta because of the many handicaps, Sri Rama leaves that mountain and reaches the hermitage of Sri Atri, greets the aforesaid Rishi, glorifying the ascetic life of his wife Ansuya. The sage urges Rama to send his consort Sita to her. Sita greets the venerable old lady on reaching her as instructed by her husband Sri Rama and is kindly received by her. Ansuya gives her instructions on the duties of a devoted wife. Chapter 118. At the end of her dialogue with Sita, Anasuya requests her to ask a boon. And highly pleased with her, the hermitess bestows heavenly flowers and ornaments on her. Urged by Ansuya, she related to the hermitess the story of her marriage. Chapter 119. Glorifying the evening shade that had now fallen, Anasuya sends away Sita, decked with ornaments bestowed on her in the presence of Sri Rama. To the latter, who was agreeably surprised to behold Sita resplendent with heavenly jewelry, she relates how she received the jewels of a loving gift from the hermitess. Accepting the hospitality of the hermits and staying with them for a night, Sri Rama takes leave of them in the morning to proceed further, and following the route shown by the hermit, the princely party enters the Dandaka forest. This completes the synopsis of Book 2 of the AyodhyaKandam, the Book of Ayodhya, of the Valmiki Ramayana. This book has 119 cantos, sargas or chapters, with 4,348 verses or shlokas. We bring you this reading of the original Valmiki Ramayana in Sanskrit, followed by translation of each sloka in Hindi and in English, published by the Gita Gorakhpur Press. We urge you to get a copy of this book for your own reading and further study. So join me next in the reading of Book 3 of the Valmiki Ramayana, the AyodhyaKandam, the Book of the Forest, which has 75 cantos, sargas or chapters, and has 2,497 verses or slokas. Om Shri Rama Rama Rameti Rame Rame Manorame Sahasranama Tattulyam Rama Nama Varanane Om Apadamapahartaram Dataram Sarvasampadam Lokabhiramam Shri Ramam Bhuyo Bhuyo Namamyaham. Dhanyavad.